We're all here to help each other get through this thing, whatever it is. Well, what this is a presentation on our work looking at data and movies, and the Academia Award goes to our research question: how can business design customized products or services that actually reflect customer preference? So let's try and do that for film, because that's an interesting area. But we were driven by this idea of personalization using data. And can we do that for film? That's a nice area to play with. So when we examine stories, there are many different storylines that have been proposed. Foster in 1959 proposed that there are only really three stories, and he looked at the fortune of the central character. And he said there's the virtuous, the selfish, and the struck by fate. Now, two other authors have said, no, there are 7 basic plot lines. Tobias has upped the ante. He says there are 20 master plots. And George Politti back in 1921, well, this is inflation, 36 plot lines he identified. But it's important to remember the emotional arc isn't necessarily the plot. And today we're interested in emotion and emotional journeys. Emotional response is key to successful storytelling. Aristotle identified the role of emotion. He said a perfect tragedy should be arranged not on the simple but on the complex plan. It should imitate actions which excite pity and fear. Traditionally, emotional content is studied via linguistic analysis. The processes of automation have developed, and we can now use natural language processing and computational narratology to try and automatically analyze stories. So, story arcs are discussed by Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut proposed a story's emotional shape is important. He compared it to, a pot or an arrowhead. The shape is the art. Now, he graphed the main character's fortunes over time. His arcs correlate to common storylines for myths and fables. This last one we can see is Cinderella. We can see here we have a sharp rise as Cinderella goes off to the ball, and a sharp fall as she has to run away from her prince, and then there's the search for her, and then obviously the happily ever after, amazing happy ending. Vonnegut shaped his work based on his examination of arcs. He thought common arcs didn't reflect life. He saw this as pretense. He proposed ambiguous arcs, and most interesting. We don't know enough about life to recognise good or bad implications. In one example, he spoke about Hamlet, where numerous, he kills somebody, he's chased by ghosts, all manner of things happen to Hamlet. And yet, we don't know in the telling of that story which are the good fortune and the bad fortune, and what the longer term implications are. Now, Kurt Vonnegut shaped his own stories based on his analysis. He abandoned simple good and bad. His stories jump back and forth through time. But the important message here is an author who used analysis to shape and change the emotional arc of his own work. Book arc identification has been automated. Reagan et al. Automated book analysis using Project Gutenberg, a collection of 1,300 mostly fictional books. They used LabMT, a word list score for sentiment. So each word has a score between 1 and 9. Those scores were assigned to books using Mechanical Turk. You take rolling blocks of words. Words are identified scores. You add them up, basically, and that gives you a score for, say, a sentence. Then you can cluster as you go through, having scored these 10,000 word blocks, cluster them and create arcs. The number of arcs obviously depends on the selected granularity of your clustering. So here's some words. So laughter is the highest ranked word, scores 8.5. Happiness, second highest ranked word, scores 8.4. Suicide, the saddest, 1.3. Rape, in fact, 1.44. So you can see if you've got a sentence with "they were very happy" and "they were in love" and there was much laughter, that's a very positive, highly scoring sentence in a sentiment analysis. But if you talk about somebody committed suicide and there was terrorism involved, this will score a very low score on the sentiment analysis. And using this, we can create measures of sentiment. Using the clustering of words, we can then start to create arcs through the percentage of the book. So here you can see various chunks of the book have been scored, and we create these drawings of the change in sentiment as we go through. So you can smooth these, and you can see there's an arc. This is called rags to riches because it starts off pretty gloomy and then gets more happy over time. So the most popular of these being The Importance of Being Earnest, The Jungle Book, Call of the Wild, The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus. So Reagan found 6 common arcs in his clustering, and this is the second of those, riches to rags, which is the opposite. Starts off well or goes bad. The Picture of Dorian Gray, Beowulf, Jekyll and Hyde, Heart of Darkness. Now, Man in a Hole. This is where you start off happy, you're faced with some challenge, and things all work out well in the end. The Dubliners, Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Through the Looking Glass. This is Icarus, the rise and fall, sailing too close to the sun. So, things start off bleak. There's a moment of good times, trying to escape maybe, or things are going well, and then a fall. So A Christmas Carol, apparently, Paradise Lost, A Princess of Mars, Three Men in a Boat, not the stories I actually know. Cinderella, hopefully a story you're familiar with, which is a rise, fall, rise. Treasure Island, The Castle of Otranto, King Solomon's Mines. And Oedipus, which is a fall followed by a rise followed by a fall. Frankenstein being the most famous example there. So this is Regan's analysis. The 6 arcs that he found, and what I've given you there is the example book with the single most downloads, and the book that is the most representative in terms of its mathematical coefficient matching that particular curve. So one of the interesting things is each popular arc has its mirror. So the top 2 is a representative of rise and fall, fall and rise. Man in a Hole is mirrored by Icarus, and Cinderella is mirrored by Oedipus. So you could argue that there's 3 arcs and we mirror them. These, in terms of the literature, are the most popular. So Man in a Hole, Oedipus, and Icarus. So if you're writing a book and you want to get good sales, by and large, that's where you want to be. Now, Chu and Roy have done sentiment analysis for film, and they used both audio and video. Filmmakers use colour to drive sentiment, and again, there's a scoring method you can use, training neural networks to look at colours, and you choose a certain number of frames and look at the colours across those and assign a score, in this case between greater than half and greater than minus a half, giving you a score there. Sound is also key to sentiment, and they use the Spotify Act to measure the valence there, using 20-second sound snippets to look at the happy or sadness of the film. And having clustered their films, created arcs, they clustered them. They found 3 statistically significant arcs: rags to riches, Icarus-type curves of sea. The other curves, we're not quite sure what they represent. There's some anomalies that you can see here, which they're artifacts in their traces. The ones at the start are typically what happens when you have titles, and because this is automated analysis, and towards the end, they're the credits at the end of the film. So our approach, we were seeking to link data to show which films are best. Now, best is a wide term here. We talk about later who thinks best in terms of money, in terms of critics, in terms of viewer reviews. Back to our research question: how can business design customized products or service that accurately reflect consumer preference? Well, we assume that in film, books are often made into films, so maybe we'll see these 6 clusters. Hypothesis 2: successful films should be the same as successful books: Icarus, Oedipus, and Man in a Hole. So as I mentioned, we combine multiple data sets to get script and different measures of film outcome. So we extract subtitles, which gave us 27,000 unique subtitles in English. We then looked at budgets and revenues and matched that data set. That gave us 9,000 films. We looked at the source quality, because the people who were putting the script up online had a rating, bronze, silver, and gold, and we only took those who were rated. So we ended up with 6,000 records there, 6,174, when we made sure that they were at least 10,000 characters long. We then matched that in with IMDb data that gave us when the film was released, the genre, the user reviews, the critic reviews, if it's won awards, these sorts of details. So to analyse, we did something subtly different to the others. We split the script into sentences. The valence was calculated by assigning each word a given value, -1, -+1, using the NNL library. The sentences were scaled from -1 to 1. We then used a transform to generate these curves. The curves were generated when we look at the runtime in the film, and we effectively say it's 0 to 100%. So it doesn't matter if there's different run times. We look at the change in emotion over the time. So we used, having generated our arcs, we used k-means clustering. And k equals 6, we find 6 arcs. So our first hypothesis is confirmed. When we compare books and films, we find the same 6 arcs mathematically proven. So let's look at the emotional journey of popular films. Again, remember that the plot isn't the emotion. So, which is why, that confused me originally. I was looking at some of these thinking, well, I'm sure that didn't end like that. But plots aren't emotion, it's looking at what's said. So there they are, rags to riches, Shawshank, Groundhog Day, riches to rags, love story, Man in a Hole, The Godfather Departed, Icarus, Mary Poppins, Cinderella, what's that, Rushmore Babe, Oedipus, All About My Mother, As Good as It Gets. So if we look at and compare the different types by the gross domestic revenue here is for the US, because that's pretty much the biggest market for most of the films we had data on. We can see that Man in a Hole and Oedipus popularity correlates with books in terms of the revenue they make, but Cinderella's outperforming Icarus. Now that suggests that emotional journey might have some time dependence. Films are more condensed than books. You can watch many films in the time it takes you to read a book. So maybe over shorter periods, people want an emotional rise equivalent to The Fall, maybe. They want a different journey. This means we reject hypothesis 2. Film and book success isn't the same. So what film to make money on? If you want to make money, what do you make? So we looked at compound effect of genre and emotional arc on domestic revenue. It was regressed. And what we see is, you can see from this chart, Man in a Hole film arc gives a mean increase in domestic revenue of 6 million. Riches to Rags gives a decline in 3 million on average there. So if you're making or funding a film, your best bet is probably going to be Man in a Hole. You're more often to be successful, but you've got to pick your genre there. You can see, comedy, Man in a Hole, comedy, that looks like a winner to me. Riches to Rags, comedy, looks like you're going to lose your shirt on that one. That's a -5. Well, how much should you spend? Budget positively correlates to revenues for all arcs. For all but Oedipus, coefficients are close to 1, meaning that if you spend $1 more on your budget, you get $1 back. Does total budget matter? Well, again, you have to pick your arc. Man in a Hole looks like it's more difficult there. It's mostly 1-to-1. Icarus type films, you can spend $5 to $10 million. By and large, your safer bets are in Man in a Hole. But Icarus, at low budget, looks like you could make some good returns there. So that's interesting and quite nuanced. Effectively, what it's telling us is big budgets are no guarantee of success, but money and arc choice helps. What do critics and viewers know? Typically, when we're designing products and services, we'll go and ask experts, or maybe our own customers. Well, in this case, critics' scores link to riches to rags stories. They like miserable films that make no money, maybe. They're challenged by the story, they might be more engaged by it, but this isn't where you're going to make your money. Man in a Hole has highest revenue. Viewer ratings are negative and significant for Man in a Hole films. Critics scores are negative and significant for these sorts of films. Now, the number of reviews correlates with revenue. So it seems we love to talk about films we don't like, or maybe people have to see the film to join the conversation, or maybe popular films just drive traffic in some way, shape, or form. Now, Oscars do correlate to revenue, but you have to be careful with these interpretations. As you know, you give an award like an Oscar and everybody sees it, and then people maybe choose to go and see the Oscar film, and that data is showing the reaction to the Oscar, not the predictive power of the Oscar. So in summary, analysis shows that we can select or design to customer preference. Experts and customers aren't necessarily the best people to ask. Detailed market analysis is required. Understanding emotional arcs of stories is helpful. Say you're commissioning a film, then automation may help you sift. Authors may alter their text to better meet an arc. Or if you're investing in a film, pick your budget, genre, and know your arc. Bonga proposed ambiguous arcs are the most interesting. Now, our analytics would force or assign ambiguous arcs to a group because it's clustering, it's using a mathematical formula. Analysis has its limits, and the training sets we use, those people's opinions that judge the impact of a particular ward, really drive all this analysis. So there are limits to the analysis. You've really got to understand the method and really get into the detail of how it was done. And remember, there are these ambiguities that the analysis won't be able to pick up, and they could be really successful. And this is the Andrei Tcharkovsky. A book read by 1,000 different people is 1,000 different books. Everybody's opinion is different. So we must take care in our analysis. Thank you.